Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a subject I've touched on before, but the cost of living, how the cost of living or the increases in the cost of living have all been 100% focused on the essentials of life, things that we must have, things that we can't do without. For most, not all, but most of the discretionary goods, the stuff that we don't need or things that are there simply for a more convenient lifestyle, those things, those consumer goods have relatively all become cheaper over time. For example, the cost of, say, a television is much cheaper now relative to wages than it was in, and I'll use 1975 as the baseline. So in 1975, a TV could take up 150% of your weekly wage, whereas a TV today with many more features and so on would only be half your weekly wage, that sort of thing. If I look at other things, the relative cost of things like vacuum cleaners or washing machines or clothes dryers and that sort of stuff, they're all cheaper relative to wages. So you've got a greater purchasing power on discretionary consumer goods. Computers. The first computer I bought was nearly $6,000, and it had this 12-inch black and white cathode ray tube, like the old television thing, had cathode ray tube, and it had I think a 5 megabyte hard disk in it, which was described in the day as a mass storage subsystem. So nearly $6,000 for a computer. I thought I was hot shit when I got that, by the way. And that was a good price at the time for what it was. It was given the computers of the day, this was pretty well tricked up. It came with a printer and some other things, and I was rather pleased with myself there getting that. Anyway, that computer, I can get a computer many times more powerful than that today for, instead of $6,000, $1,000, less than $1,000. So that gives you an idea as to how much prices have fallen in consumer goods. In that case, being consumer electronics. Now, there's also some other differences, like say an electric razor, as an men's electric razor. Back in the day, you bought an electric razor and that was supposed to last you a lifetime. Seriously, that's what it was looked at. This is you get like people would get electric razors for 21st birthday presents on the assumption that when they were 65, the thing would still be working and they would hand it on to their children or grandchildren. So consumer electronics, whether it be mixing machines in the kitchen or refrigerators and so on, they were viewed as things you would have for your entire life, not a throwaway item that after 10 years or so you throw it out. So there were a little bit differences in terms of longevity and things that were called planned obsolescence and so on. Now, but when it comes to the essentials of life, things you must have, shelter, food, energy, transport, all that sort of stuff, things you must have. Well, transport, you could say, well, do you use public transport or not? So but certainly food, shelter, and energy, things you must have. All of those things are wildly more expensive, insanely more expensive than they were. And I used the example in 1975. Here's an apartment that cost $20 to rent. $20 a week to rent in 1975. That same apartment today is now $490 a week to rent. Now, if the rent had kept pace with wages, so just keeping pace with wages, maybe even marginally in front, but around, it would be somewhere between $220 a week to $250 a week, somewhere in that range. But it's $490 a week, so it's more than double. The rent you have to pay per week has increased at more than double the rate of wages. Now, if we look at, say, the cost of a mortgage, and we factor in all the things like the wages, the tax you pay, the take-home pay after you've paid tax, and social security and interest rates and do all those adjustments, which is actually a bit of mathematics goes into that. Then we can say, well, the price of real estate has increased at 4 times the rate of wages. And this is in Sydney, I'm using, which is again, Sydney is one of the more expensive cities in the world, but the difference will still be always between 3 and 4 times, no matter where you go across the Western world. So a little bit more than 4 times in some places, so the cost of real estate in Sydney has gone up at 4 times the rate of wages. Now, why are the essentials of life getting much more expensive? The essentials of life would all become monopolies and market category. I use the term market loosely because we don't have a market operating anymore in the West. It's all centrally planned around the globalist cabal and their needs and their desire for zero risk, supernormal profit returns. So everything that we must have, the water, the sewage, all this sort of stuff is now, medical care in a lot of cases, is all now horrendously expensive. But the things we must have, the optional stuff that we, whether it be motor vehicles or TVs or computers or something, the optional stuff is much cheaper than it was relative to wages. So we've seen this massive imbalance. People didn't have a whole lot of consumer goods. Certainly when I was a kid, anyway. You went into the person who had a colour television when they first came out in Australia, anyway. They were very expensive. For a lot of people, it was a month's pay to buy a colour television. So only the wealthier or well-to-do people had that sort of money. I remember the first guy in the street that got a colour television. We all went to his place to and ah at it, and the colour was like the quality of the transmission. Everyone had a face like the carrot or something. And so the cost of consumer goods was much more expensive then. They're much cheaper now, but you can't live in a television or eat it or something like that. But why is it that only the essentials of life, things we can't do without, have become much more expensive? And if we look at a lot of these things, they were in government hands. Energy, as in electricity generation, and so on, were in government hands. Now they're in private hands. These public-private partnership things, which are just wealth transfer devices, and transport too. And if you look at the cost or the price that you have to pay for all these services compared to what they were when they were government-owned, regardless of whether they were efficiently run or not. I don't think they're much more efficiently run now, but you have to pay vastly more money for it, and the Green New Deal and all this sort of stuff. So we've got a situation where the essentials, things you cannot do without, are far more expensive than they once were, and they've eroded the purchasing power of the average wage. And if you look at, just looking again, came back to this rent baseline from 1975. Remember, somebody who rents that apartment that was once $20 a week in 1975, they've now got to find nearly $500 a week to do it. Then you look at, and that's, by the way, a 1-bedroom apartment, so you wouldn't necessarily have a family. That's going to take up, in average wage terms, that's still going to take up more than half the average wage just going in rent. So when you got half the average wage going in rent, you look at the higher price of things like energy and electricity and transport and all that sort of stuff. You look at that, then the discretionary spending that's left over is quite small, quite minimal. So just to cover the essentials of life, most people are consuming 3/4 plus of their paycheck, which means they've got almost nothing or very little left over for discretionary items, which are things such as clothing, and maybe if they want to get a cup of coffee or something, that sort of thing. Even that's now, and if you look at for people certainly on the average wage and below, in most Western countries, if not all now, even the idea of going to a takeout food store, the chains like the McDonald's and whatever, that's now considered luxurious. And if you do a cost comparison on what it costs to buy stuff in the grocery store to what it costs to get and I appreciate the convenience difference. You walk straight in, someone else, you eat straight away, someone else does the washing up, all that type of thing. So other than convenience, it's now luxurious. A whole family of 4 can eat for the same price as it would cost you to buy, a Big Mac meal, one Big Mac meal in a McDonald's restaurant. So the economics have vastly changed there. But I'd like to come back to that. All the essentials of life that we must pay for, that we can't do without, are all owned by big globalist cabals now. The BlackRocks and so on. They're all owned by the same half dozen big finance organizations, and some monopolies have been handed to them, so they're making massive profits, zero risk, totally risk-free profits, and paying themselves vast salaries. Imagine this: you're running a monopoly. The government is even protecting your monopoly. The government protects the high prices that you're charging. People have got nowhere else to go, but the CEO is paying themselves gazillion-dollar pay packets. For what? What are they doing? Every customers are forced in the front door. There's no clever marketing or sales or anything at all. The administration is utterly bloated and inefficient, and yet these people walk away with gazillion-dollar pay packets for administering a monopoly when the customer's got nowhere else to go and the customer has to have it. I mean, for goodness sakes. So we really need to the globalist cabal has taken over. All the essentials of life now monopolies in one way or another, which guarantee them risk-free, supernormal profit returns. And we're all getting screwed in the process. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.